family is.
I'm just looking to see how long the video went before it got denied by YouTube. And my answer to that is like, I thought we didn't have any culture.
Right.
How did we force anything on you?
Only when it works with the argument.
When I see how people think that, like, okay, well, whites have no culture. Number one, they're taking all these different nationalities, you know, of different European lineages and people, and grouping it all into white.
Mm-hmm.
You know, grouping it all into a skin color. That's kind of a problem.
That's racist in itself.
It is. And it's basically disregarding any background culture that someone's family could have by calling them that. But I mean, we allow ourselves to be called that all the time. We call ourselves that. So there's many families who do hold on to their old country customs still after this many generations, and they just don't really broadcast it to people.
Yeah.
Like Adam was talking about basically like white culture. He's kind of being funny about it, tongue in cheek, but he's talking about like he put a mullet thing on, was talking about like NASCAR and drinking whatever beer and, you know, those sorts of things, and hunting and all that stuff. All that stuff is a part of it, of that particular sect. See, that shows right there that there's like cultural diversity amongst white people, because that's one little piece.
That's a very small
It is.
group, actually.
It really is. I mean, but like I said, there's a lot of families who do hold on to their old country customs, but, you know, there's that other segment of their family, maybe the other half of it, that's like, man, stop it with that old shit, that old country. Kind of like Mexicans do this. I grew up around Mexicans, and, you know, there's always the Mexican family who still does the quinceañeras. They still dress a certain way. They eat a certain way. They speak primarily Spanish at home and stuff like that, and they talk about Mexico and whatnot. But then there's always that group within their family, or even the rest of the block, that's like, man, take that shit back to Mexico. We're in America now. You're American. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's not so much like, you know, they always talk about white people saying, like, go back to your country. No, it's like that's an American thing where people tell their own people that.
Yeah.
Like, go back there if you want to be there. That old, you know, corny shit or whatever. It's always like the younger generation is like, you know, go on with that shit. But, I mean, when you really start looking at it, I know it's fun to just make, you know, whites the butt end of a joke and not really examine the thought behind it or anything. Kind of like the easy target type of thing. But as far as holding on to, like, old country customs, I don't think anybody in the United States does it more than Jews.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Do quite a bit, respectively so.
So, like, basically what I'm tearing apart is people's picture of white. Because when they hear white, they probably just picture this thing that's been shown to them on TV. You know, that the guy in the office that, you know, speaks overly proper and he's corny and he's fucking happy all the time. Or it's the dude who, like, roofs and comes home and beats his wife when he's drunk at the end of the day and, like, you know, goes to NASCAR on a weekend. Those are, like, the two
Gets pulled over and never gets in trouble, right?
Yeah, that too. You know, because his family's in the police department. But anyways, like, you have those two weird extremes, but realistically, it's way more diverse than that. And I would argue that even outside of the dash American, Europe has had the most diversity of culture out of any other area in the world for so long. It's unreal. Like, I mean, so, you know, take a look at the United States, and it's like you have Irish families who still do what they consider to be Irish things. Mm-hmm. They may still hold, you know, I don't want to say hatred, but animosity towards, you know, they have the Protestant Catholic thing there and all that.
I mean, we held on to that in my family for a long time. I have a box sitting right next to me with my dance medals in it from Irish dance.
Yeah,
Nobody else was doing that except for the Irish people in our school.
And there were several, right?
A lot. It was a huge dance school, and we went to competitions that were huge.
And you were in a decent area, and like, honestly, normally Irish people on average aren't very wealthy, so that just shows you that even in a place where their demographic is small, they all take part in, you know, so it's there, it's just not advertised all the time. So you have the Irish families who still eat Irish food, they're still devoted to their religion that goes back to the old country, they still have animosity toward the other Irish, things like that. Italians are really big on still, you know, their church practices, their food and all of that stuff, and even old country music. I mean, like I said, sometimes the young people don't grab onto that when they get older. they're curious, they go back.
Mm-hmm.
I have Polish people in my family where every time there's a family get together, they're eating nothing but Polish food.
Yeah.
You know, they're talking about church stuff. And see, religion keeps working into it because that was a big part of identity back then.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of talk about what was going on in a church and stuff like that. There was like, you know, Eastern Europeans, a lot of them are here more recently. They basically still hold on to all of their stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you really start breaking it down. It's like you got Italians that hold on to what their traditions are. You got Irish who do that. I mean, the Irish still kind of do the thing where, you know, X amount of guys in their family going to law enforcement and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a thing with them. You know, a lot of times they throw out like certain things about like, oh, Christianity was a big part of the KKK, stuff like that. Well, first off, that was only Protestants.
Yeah.
And it was only Southern Protestants, and it was only wealthy Southern Protestants that started that and spread it and everything like that. It's crazy to go ahead and give that to the entire so-called race.
Oh, whatever is bad is what they want to hand to us. So.
Yeah. And there's also the other thing where it's like there's a big claim nowadays that our culture was forced on to blacks and other people of color. And my answer to that is like, I thought we didn't have any culture.
Right.
How did we force anything on you?
Only when it works with the argument.
That's the thing. That's a problem with the left in general and the woke is that they want both sides of an argument. You can't have both.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell somebody that they're poor and then a few minutes later tell them that they're spending extravagantly out of their savings.
Yeah.
Like, dude, hold on a second. The whole thing with this is like, yeah, what Adam was talking about, like the culture of working hard and stuff like that, all of that's true. And he used it as a way to talk about the whole Carhartt thing, but I don't even want to go into that.
Yeah.
Even though that was a conversation with some guys at the gym. So it is one of those things that...
It's a hot button right now.
Yeah. He was talking about that particular thing. And what I'm talking about is there are many white families who hold on to their heritage and their traditions. And because they've decided to be American and it's just a melting pot and everybody, like we've basically started creating our own customs and stuff like that here, they don't broadcast that stuff to people. The people wouldn't understand it. They're not trying to recruit. You know, if you're Italian, you're not going to throw all your Italian customs in a Polish guy's face trying to bring him over to the Italian side.
Right.
No, you go do that with your Italian people. It's funny, like, unfortunately, because of how short of an amount of time some of these groups have been in America, like, the only representation you can really see is from, like, a criminal era. But if you look at La Cosa Nostra, to some degree, I mean, you could take the majority of the crime and stuff out of it. That showed a little bit of what Italian culture was, that era.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, certain parts of the honor and not trusting the police and blah, blah, blah. Back in the day, the Irish would have threes. It was they'd have a criminal man in the family,
Mm-hmm.
normally like a bootlegger at that time. Then they'd have a guy in government, and then they'd have a guy who was a cop.
Yep.
You know, it was like they made jokes about it being like the Trinity because they were religious and stuff like that. So, I mean, you guys got to remember that this was, you know, in most instances, less than 100 years ago, that your ghetto dwellers were like, you know, also almost predominantly like Italians and Irish and Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a few things went right and a few things didn't. And that's why a lot of those people have ended up where they are today. In that amount of time since then, like say I had family who came over here really early, like in the 1600s. But then I had some family who came here in like, I think it was like the 20s or 30s. In that amount of time, it's like they've rushed into this American dream. That was kind of the culture, was the American dream of working hard and living in the suburbs and everybody's equal and you can be whatever religion and explore different hobbies and, you know, all these things is really exciting. They went headfirst into that and kind of abandoned some of that old world stuff. And you got to think that in some instances, maybe they did some of that on purpose, even if it was subconsciously, because some of that old world stuff was tied to the very reasons that they came here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's tied to negative shit. So they wanted a new start, a fresh start. So to some, like I said, it may seem like there's no culture amongst these white people, but there's plenty of culture. It's just something that they probably don't spend enough time learning about and teaching their kids nowadays. But, this country's become like this consumer oriented, money driven society. Unfortunately, when you have a melting pot, but to go back and say like, hey, I want to know about my heritage, like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be over here. You're supposed to be like,
don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't think about that. Forget about it. I mean, and obviously also there's a lot of people, this contributes to the thought that there's no white culture. There's also a lot of white people like myself and you somewhat that have so many different types of nationalities within them.
Yeah, it's hard to pick one.
Yeah, how are you going to just pick one, and how are you going to like juggle all of them?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start pondering that, when you're younger and stuff like that, it's kind of like, dude, focus. You're American now, man. You're part of the American system.
Right.
But now there's like ancestry.com and 23andMe and stuff like that. People are starting to learn their original roots and they're kind of interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait a minute, it's been pitched to me.
Our culture here is fucking boring.
It is. There isn't much culture at all.
It's the same shit. Like, I'm sorry, but I want to learn different things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I got to say about them saying there's no white culture, and this may sound like whatever terminology they use to describe this, but most of American culture is little pieces of white cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So many different white cultures contribute to that you can't possibly, as, say, an Irish person, say, I want to keep that in place because it represents my people. No, there's pieces of it that are kind of from the Irish, some are from the Italian, but further back, obviously, it goes back to, the British and stuff like that. The British and the French. The people I've been naming have only been around in America for like kind of a short time.
Right.
You start talking about like there's no white culture. Well, I don't know, dude. Them Amish people have a pretty rich
they don't
specific
give that
culture. No. I mean, you have the same people that would complain that, oh, there's nothing but this kind of church in this town. But then they'll say that those people have no culture. It's like, but wait a minute. You're complaining they have too much culture.
Yeah.
You're complaining all the restaurants there have the same kind of food. And all these sorts of things. You start looking at the food that we eat here. You look at the music we listen to. The places we go. The activities that we take part in. All of those have a root that goes back to some tradition of some group who's present here in America today.
Yeah.
And because of the whole assimilation melting pot thing, chances are that most people that are of that lineage don't even know that it came from their people, quote unquote. Like I said, I've got different nationalities within my family, and maybe that's what showed me how interesting the different cultures amongst white people is that they're so different.
Yeah, they are very different.
I mean, culturally, do you see many similarities between, say, like a German and an Italian?
No.
Not a lot, huh? Or like, I don't know, like just pick one, like say an Ashkenazi Jew and someone from Sweden. No. I mean, you guys can say they're similar because they have the same colored skin.
Pale.
Right, because they're pale. But at the same time, they eat different things. They greet each other differently. They value different things.
They celebrate different holidays.
The creation story is different.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I keep coming back to the religion thing on it, because the most important thing in our heart of hearts, usually, is our creation story.
Yeah.
Like, how did we get here? Why are we here? Like, what's the purpose? What are we supposed to do in the meantime until we find out? The creation story of all these people is essentially different.
Yes, it is.
You guys also have to realize that there's no there's no mass conspiracy that, hey, my white people and your white people and their white people, we got to stick together because we're white. That's just not real.
No, it's not.
You got to think to yourselves how these quote-unquote white people in their native lands, how they warred with each other for thousands of years.
Yeah, over a lot of things, especially religion.
Yeah, the religion's always a part of it, but I mean, just in general, like, say, if you go through the history and there's like a good series of documentaries on it, that's a lot of hours you got to dedicate to it, but like the history of Great Britain,
mm-hmm.
the amount of the different groups of the whites in that area just killed each other off, and just, I mean, you got like the Visigoths in there, and then you got the who else? The Saxons, and you got all these different groups that are fighting against each other for this little tiny piece of land, and you have to realize that was happening for every other piece of land.
Yeah,
like the Sicilians and the French, you'd consider them both to be white, But the real meaning of the word mafia is an acronym for like death to the French while the Italian countryside weeps or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, the French basically like almost enslaved them for like 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you're not going to see some French guy wee into like the whatever the Italian guy's proposing to get together with the German guy and bring the Russian guy into it and go get the Sweden dude, and now we're going to take over the world.
Yeah, I mean, like, the only place that happens really is prison, okay? That's, like, out here just because we are, the same skin tone. Just because we, like, work in the same places or, like, in the same grocery stores or whatever. It's because we live in the same fucking country. That's literally
and because and if you say we, like, as far as white people, we're also the majority statistically, so of course.
Sorry, we walk down the same street as another white person. That doesn't mean I'm like, yo, we got some, like, thing. Like, hey, like, you know what's up, right?
Come on, you already know.
Like, I probably hate that guy,
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, normally.
I don't like people.
Yeah, like.
Especially my own kind. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I don't like people, so that's just, like, dumb to consider that people are even like that.
Now, when there was a racial element towards people in any given place and it grew and turned into, like, nationwide racism, it was more a situation where you had, like, let's say the Irish dominated this area and made a lot of money off of it. And this is, where their family is and their kids are going to school. And all of a sudden, like, Italians start coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those guys are the outsiders. They're hated. They get blamed for every problem that happens, stuff like that, because the Irish got to stick together. So that's the way it always works with groups of people. You can go on and on with lists of this happening. And I mean, I always bring up the instance of the whole Columbus Day thing. It's not about Christopher Columbus. That's basically Italian American Day. And it was given as a consolation prize for, I believe it was 18 Italians getting lynched for no reason in New Orleans. Look that shit up. It's the truth. And so they were what was considered the low class, scapegoat for everything at that time in Louisiana was the Italians. I think they're specifically Sicilian, but same thing for all intents and purposes. And at some points in history, well, obviously the Jews were considered to be, whatever. And then, of course, in this country for a lot of years, it was the blacks, what I'm saying? And then in certain areas of the country, that's the other thing. I also feel like people should understand this more now because there's more information readily available without having to travel to places. But while everyone was barking about, like, all this racism against blacks and stuff like that and beef between whites and blacks, it's like there was parts of the country who essentially didn't have any black people and it was about Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it was like this group of Mexicans and that group of Mexicans. There's whites, Mexicans. It's just whoever encroaches on your territory is what I'm getting at. People a lot of times get offended because I'll use certain examples off the top of my head. But I'm just saying there's always that outside group that comes in. People start blaming their problems on us, saying they're taking their opportunities away.
People do that towards white people all the time now.
They do.
All the time.
In the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of it towards Asian Americans on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And see, that goes back even to built-in animosity based on wars between Americans and them. Mm-hmm. And it takes decades for that to kind of dissipate. I can't even talk about how, for a couple thousand years, Native American tribes spent all their time warring with each other. No, because the narrative is that they were completely peaceful until the white man came here and attacked them and corrupted them.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, like that particular thing, which whites was that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And then it's like, oh, well, it's America. It's like, well, wait a minute. Just because one skin color dominated the percentage of people in the country doesn't mean there's not subgroups in it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what I'm saying. These things matter. Even if, if people aren't observing them enough, that's up to them. But I feel like, just the insinuation that whites don't have culture.
It's trying to erase the culture we do have.
The little bit that's left. Like I said, there's a lot of things we do in America as customs that people don't even know comes from certain very specific nationalities. You know, it could be a Russian thing, or it could go back to like Vikings and shit. Mm-hmm. But nobody knows that's exactly where it came from, but it is. And I celebrate all people who came to this country under a struggle, which is basically everyone.
Yeah.
You know, like I say in the song, the Proud White Man song, I talk about like a lot of bloodlines drying up over the Atlantic. We talk about, you know, whatever, 89 people got on this boat to come here and try to start a colony. And then you hear 57 of them made it here. And then you hear 32 of them fucking died in the first year. Mm-hmm. Most of those were entire bloodlines just gone.
Yeah.
Just fucking gone. And so if your family's one of the few who made it, hacked their way through the brush, you know, found a way to light a fire close enough to where they're sleeping, to where they're warm, but they're not catching themselves on fire. Like, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, they'd clash with natives and stuff like that. But what do you think's going to happen when you go to a new land?
Oh, yeah.
That's happened for for all of man's existence. All of it. And there's always bumping of heads. There's always fighting, all these kinds of things. I don't know. Adam's video really just tapped back into it. We've talked about this briefly in here before. But just the thought that, you know, whites are just this culture, like we just steal culture from others.
Yeah.
If you take all of the inventions and, you know, breakthroughs out of current society that the so-called white man invented, there wouldn't be much. It is what it is. I'm sorry, it's true. And it's because a lot of different cultures contributed to that. Mm-hmm. You know, there's not this big, ever-powerful country called white.
Yeah.
And whiteys, the whiteys come out of it. And and they come here and just create things because it's so huge and ever powerful. No, it's like, you know, this Jewish guy comes here, works his ass off so his son can get a job with some big company, and that son invents something, and now we all use it every day. You know, there's one individual who comes from the work ethic of one father, from one country, from one culture. And then, you know, you could keep saying the same thing as you go down a list of inventions and companies and all of these things. It's all around you, and that's why you don't see it.
Yeah.
That's some profound sounding shit. It's all around you, and that's why you don't see it. It just becomes your scenery, and there it is again. It's like, oh yeah, America's white dominated. No, I would say that it's Irish dominated, British dominated, French dominated, you know, Italian dominated, Russian dominated. All pretty big, significant countries who accomplished plenty of things on their own before their people came here and brought some of that work ethic or custom or idea or whatever to. And, you know, this country, of course, we're going to have more creations. No empire in history has had, in the entire history of their existence, has had as many important inventions and implementations as America's had in just a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, there's a couple reasons for that. You have some of the greatest people coming from all different places. You also have some of the most desperate people coming from places. They're coming here with nothing. They got to hurry up and figure out something. Like, I got to invent something. It's a whole new clean slate, new country. I can come up with something. What was the thing in The Sopranos? Like, in our house, Christopher Columbus is a hero,
yeah.
or something like that. That was kind of a joke, but I was reading an article on that, and they were trying to get across that era of Italians were desperately trying to hold on to some of the Italian culture and try to get it across to their kids before their kids went away to college.
That's what that whole episode was about.
That's right. It was, wasn't it?
They were protesting the whole Columbus.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They did cover that on there. It feels like it was like, God, it feels like this is a new thing, but it sure as hell ain't. It's been going on for a long time with the Columbus thing. That's what they were trying to get across in that was about that particular generation of Italians, was like they wanted to hold on to some of the values and important things that were close to their heart and pass it to their kids. But their kids would go to school and basically be told, nah, all that's wrong.
Right.
Nah, clean slate. No, you're not. Don't talk about that Italian shit. These are the groups of people that we salute and glorify nowadays. Your people are bad.
Yeah, they don't matter anymore.
you don't take from one minority to give to another one.
It doesn't work out.
No, they basically took Columbus Day from the Italians to give it to natives, basically because like the American government and those particular whatever nationalities that were behind those white guys, they had hurt the natives.
Yeah.
The Italians, meanwhile, are like, dude.
So we get nothing then?
We didn't do shit to the Indians. And we didn't do shit to the natives. Like, why us? We didn't have nobody in office at that time. We didn't have none of that. We were in the ghetto, like, doing our thing and waiting for our chance to shine and getting lynched. We knew nothing of these Native Americans. You know what I'm saying? That's a big problem right there. It's like, okay, create another day.
Yeah.
Give them a different fucking day. Don't take from this group to give to that one. And it's always because it's easy to explain in a classroom in 5 minutes, get people's attention. Columbus was a rapist and a horrible person and this, that, and the other. And that sticks to the kids' heads and they're like, yeah, to hell with that guy and that holiday. If you're taught this person is bad, you might be like, yeah, he really was bad. Oh, yeah, there's good documentation there. I implore you to go look up how that person was good. Like, just go do that, and then you'll probably find all kinds of things because people are complex. Groups of people are far more complex. But it is interesting that when somebody finds out that they're, English in their lineage or they're German or something like that, they're always like, oh, man. Like, for real. They're like, oh, man, because that's not, like, considered to be like a cool culture or a good culture.
Right, yeah.
No, seriously, like the Greek one, I'm glad you said that one, is because that one is tricky, but it's also a great example of, yeah, there's plenty of this group of quote unquote whites who still practice old country customs here, still value them, but you don't know about it because they're American, they take part in American society, and they don't run around throwing in your face, I'm Greek, bitch, I'm Greek. Like, you just think of them as another white dude.
Yeah.
Those guys are better than white dudes. And there's nothing wrong with saying that all these people are equal. Say the whites and stuff like that. But there has to be some individualism. There has to be some sort of, like, you're allowed to be slightly different than the rest of the whites.
It's just not fair to say that we aren't slightly different than each other. That's not okay.
We're all very different.
Like, that's just ridiculous, man. I've met so many different types of people in my life that had the same skin color as me. So many different types.
Oh, hell yeah.
I've lived in a lot of different places, different states, north, south, like an island. I mean, fuck, dude. I've seen a lot of fucking people in different customs, and they all had the same skin color that I did for the most part. Maybe like a little darker here, a little lighter there, but they were all white, quote unquote.
And did all of those different types of white people, if you put them in a room together, did they all support each other and love each other?
No.
Exactly.
No, I mean, if they were friends, sure.
Right. Like, that's something I've always seen more than anything.
There's a lot of racial divide within white people, too, believe it or not.
And it's not even, like, racial. It's not, like, classist.
Yeah,
it's like, they want... In order to elevate themselves, a lot of people want to look at the majority of other white people as white trash. Discredit anything they've ever done. They've, like, all the things that, they say that are being said about and done toward people of color in this country now are all things that were happening in, say, the early 1900s amongst groups of whites. The Italians are saying horrible things about the Irish. The Irish was saying horrible things about the Jews. And then when the Russians came in, maybe two of those groups hated the Russians, so now they have a common enemy, so they're cool for a minute.
Right.
And it just goes on and on and on and on. And it's like the thing I said earlier about, you end up having like a scapegoat in the neighborhood. And yeah, it's a problem when your government is that way, because your government's going to be a reflection of what's on the street, basically, in its own way. And yeah, it takes time for there to be kind of representative numbers of people there. It takes time for enlightenment, for people to learn how to live amongst each other and to help each other and all that stuff, regardless of, if their name ends in a fucking vowel or not. The richest culture probably, You know, if you took different pieces of the world or different continents, you wanted to know the richest cultural diversity amongst people on a continent or something like that. I would say that in Europe, there's more cultural diversity from country to country than anywhere else. And something that's really striking about that is those countries are all very close to each other.
Yeah.
And they're that different.
Mm-hmm.
It's because they all came from different places after the same thing. They fought, you know, they held on to this thing to keep them strong throughout that struggle. And they held on to it for a long time. And they all maintained their individuality, I guess I'll call it. But yeah, like I would say that there's more cultural diversity amongst white people than anything else. And hey, that's because we make up the majority of the country, and there's a whole lot of different groups that contribute to white. So if you want to like typecast people and be real specific and have it really hit home and be true, you might want to like make it less broad.
Yeah.
Now, don't use the skin color, maybe. I don't know. Use like hair color or fucking freckles or...
Get more creative. It's boring.
Yeah, it really is. Like, I mean, at least white people really know how to like insult other groups of white people.
Yeah.
Like, dude, like people think that our jokes about like blacks and stuff like that are bad. You should hear the ones that whites say about other groups of whites. Right now, at this time in history, is the weirdest, most inopportune time to talk about, you know, a skin color not having color, especially because it's coming from other whites.
Yeah.
I talk about that in the damn song Proud White Man too, where like my problem's never been with the blacks.
No.
It's with the sub-race of white people. It's with these, you know, like college kids that think they know everything and really rich whites and, you know, who have never lived amongst other groups of people, not even other groups of white people.
Yeah.
Like they've only been at their country club with their 4 or 5 friends and whatever. Basically, the ones that are saying we have no culture and insulting us are the children of the very people that you see as a white stereotype in your mind when you think of evil white people.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty much pointing the finger at themselves, but they don't realize they're pointing it at us too, and we're not a part of their thing. You know, so that's the craziest part about it.
Some of us have like tried and wanted to be part of their thing forever because like we thought that we were supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And then realized, wow.
It's the whole thing where they look down on you that you're not a part of it.
Yeah.
Like your
dad's not part of the golf club. So.
Right. I mean, I'm good on that. I don't need to be a part of the country club and stuff like that. But I don't know. That's just my rant. We'll be back with another important topic very soon. But I'd love to know you guys' thoughts on like, okay, if you're white, let me know if you teach your kids any of the stuff that comes from your particular lineage, you know, or if you just basically feel like, hey, that stuff's in the past. I'm American now. You know, if you're a person of color, you know, let me know if you actually do see that there's a rich culture behind, you know, this white guy that's different from that white guy. It's almost as though...
Or do we all look the same?
I mean, you know, some of us do look the same, but...
So some of y'all do too, of every race. Every single race looks like each other.
But let me know what you guys think as far as white culture. I just want to know people's thoughts on this subject. I would like to hear some people sound off on what they are exactly. Like, for instance, I'm thinking of a couple people who will definitely watch the video and chime in. And as good, especially one of them, as good of friends as I am with them, I don't know what the fuck they are. Mm-hmm. I know they're white. See, there's an example of like public school and society teaching you to group people in as one thing. Somebody can be practically like your brother and you know nothing about their background previous to 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the fuck most of my white friends are. Yeah. Like, what, you know, for all I know, they're walking around with all kinds of cool stories about stuff that happened a couple 100 years ago and they're related to some kind of royalty, and I have no fucking idea. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Well, I guess we just don't always advertise that shit. But you got anything to add about whites?
No.
Be on the lookout February 18th for Proud White Man by Don Verb, produced by Jay Palm, who's what? Not a white man.
Oh, yeah.
There's a little Donald Trump sample in that song. All right, we gotta go take care of the baby. So take care of your babies, and we'll see you again soon. And on that note, I say peace.